my worst experience took place in my bedroom. After about 3 months on board, I had come to terms with the fact that I was stuck on this strange ship. Some of the fear had gone away, I think, since you get used to being on edge. At this point, I didn't pay attention to the knocking on my door, and it may have stopped, but I'm not sure. Anyway, I went to bed one night, read for a while, and then turned off the light. As soon as I turned off the light, I thought I saw a person standing over the bed, but it was pretty dark, so I couldn't be sure. I jumped in surprise, then told myself not to be silly because I thought it was just my eyes getting used to the dark. The figure then sat down on the bed, pushed my legs together, and turned its head toward me. Already I can hear you thinking it was sleep paralysis, but I've had that happen before and know it wasn't that. My arms and upper body were free to move, but my legs felt like they were stuck under something heavy. They felt like they had a weight on them. The blanket was stuck, and I was frantically pulling at it to get it off my legs, but it felt impossible. When I realized I wasn't dreaming, I started to feel scared. I was fully awake and couldn't get away from this weird presence. My heart was beating fast, and I could feel cold sweat appear on my temples. I tried to get to the light switch, but it wasn't close enough. I hit nothing with my hands when I swung them at the spot where the figure should have been. The figure finally stood up, and I was able to move my legs again. There was nothing there when I turned on the light. After that, I couldn't sleep without a nightlight even after I got off the ship. Almost any sound would scare me, and I'd wake up scared. Fear stayed with me when I thought about all the strange things that had happened. It was hard to feel safe in the dark. There was a strange event a few hours ago that I still can't understand. It's close to the water where I live in Halifax, Nova Scotia. A big sea buoy washed up on the shore, my friend told me. No one seems to know how or why it got so far away from where it usually is. He told me he wanted to take some shots, and I didn't ask him many questions. He and I hadn't talked in a while because he didn't like the friends I hang out with. Anyway, I thought it would be fun to hang out since school was out for the week. So, I went with him. I didn't mind that it was a few kilometers to the beach. I thought the walk would be good for me. We met up again after about 30 minutes and walked for 45 minutes. As we walked on the snow and seaweed, we talked for a while. The beach is lined with many tall towers that go on for kilometers. They didn't look like phone towers, though. When I asked my dad about the service, he acts strangely, like he's not telling the whole truth or hiding something. We chose to climb the rock in front of us to get a better view of the beach and maybe find the buoy. The temperature changed while we were going up, but we didn't notice it. It became very dark and cloudy, and there were no birds flying above, animals nearby, or cargo ships far away. It seemed like nothing was moving at all. At the time, we didn't notice how strange it was because we were too busy trying to find the buoy. My friend's phone lost service when we got to the top. It froze and reset itself on its own for no reason. He said that phones often break down when it's too cold outside. We looked around, but the buoy and anything living were nowhere to be found. That's why we chose to go back and end the day. We were ready to go home because it was getting cold. Before we left, my friend tried to take a picture of himself sitting on the cliff, but his phone died just as I was about to take the picture. We saw some light coming through the clouds as we were going back. My friend tried his phone again and took a picture because it looked so beautiful. I had the strangest feeling that someone was watching us all of a sudden. When I turned around, I saw a man walking slowly toward us. He was getting closer quickly, though. I told my friend that the man had just shown up out of the blue. He couldn't have been hidden because we could see him from the cliff. From far away, my friend looked at the man and then at me. He said the man's face was hidden. I thought he was kidding at first, but then I saw he wasn't. Then, we heard a terrible, loud, screaming sound coming from next to us. The sound was like a metal saw rubbing against someone yelling. We made up our minds to run very quickly. I ran for about a minute, and then turned around to see the man walking behind the fence. He was breaking the law because he was on military land, but he had to have known that because there were signs everywhere telling him not to. As soon as my friend got back on the road and away from the beach, his phone started to buzz with social media alerts. Birds that had been in the ocean came back and flew over. It was far away, but we could see cargo ships moving all around. It seemed like everything was fine again. It's likely that the tower stopped the phone. If they were communication towers, they might block phone messages to keep people safe, especially in those kinds of places. My friend and I thought it would be best to go home after that strange event. We didn't want to stay longer, even more so after everything that had happened. As much as we both want more proof to help us understand what happened, all we have are the specifics. It's annoying because I can't understand it without the photos. I don't check my phone very often, so I didn't notice right away. But when I did, I saw that it had broken on its own. It wasn't dropped, and it stopped working for no reason. This happened when I was about 19 years old, 15 years ago. During that time, I worked on cargo ships that took items across the ocean. I was still getting used to living on board. The ship I worked on was about 30 years old, which might not seem like a long time. If you do a job like this, you know what it's like to be the new young guy on a crew of men. A lot of them had lived and worked together for months or even years. You don't fit in, and you need to prove that you're good at your job. You can also expect a lot of jokes from the other people. When I got on the ship, the crew began talking about a ghost that was there. They also asked me if I thought ghosts existed. I told them no, even though that wasn't true because I've had strange things happen to me before. Then I heard a loud knock on my cell door about a week after I got on board. It was small, in the middle of the living room, and didn't have a window. It was my home. When I opened the door, no one was there, so I thought someone was joking with me. It started to happen a lot and at different times. Sometimes 3 loud knocks woke me up. Every time I would jump up and open the door as quickly as I could to catch whoever it was. But I never saw or heard anyone running away. The hall was about 20 meters long, and my cabin was in the middle of it. To get around a turn, I had to run about 10 meters. I thought I had opened the door quickly enough a few times to see someone, but there was no one in the hall. This made me think that it might have been someone in a close cabin. I wanted to know about the people who were staying in the cabins next to mine. In one cabin, there was an old man in his 60s. I saw him around, but he moved slowly every time. That's why I didn't think he was the one at my door. There was no one in the other rooms. There are often extra rooms on older ships like this one, because they were built to hold more crew members. But ships often sail with fewer crew members these days, so many rooms are empty. The knocking didn't stop until I was hanging up my shirt in my closet one day, right next to the cabin door. There was a knock all of a sudden. I opened the door so quickly that I thought someone would be standing there, but there was no one in the hallway. Right then, I knew something strange was going on. I paid more attention to what other people were saying, and I could feel that there was a lot of weight on board. There was no other ship that felt like this one. I had been on 2 before this one, and 4 after it. People who worked on those ships usually got along with each other, and everyone seemed calm. It felt different on this ship, though. Something wasn't right. After that, things got worse. At night, one of my jobs was to walk around the ship and make sure there were no problems and that the cargo was safe. I was going to bring a radio with me so I could call for help from the bridge. The radio would sometimes throw out loud buzzes for no reason. When I called the officer on the bridge to see if they had heard anything, they said they hadn't and that they hadn't heard any static. This happened with more than one radio. That night, at 2 a.m., I was going through the corridors when an alarm went off. I turned around and saw the door shut behind me. It was waterproof. I sent a radio message to the bridge to see if they were closing it, which wouldn't happen very often since the door is only opened for emergencies or tests. The second mate said no, and his computer also showed that the door was still open. The second mate radioed to tell me to try to open the door by hand, but it was already closed. He couldn't open it remotely either. The door wouldn't open until I pulled the handle. I told the mate over the radio, and he said he would have the experts look into it. I kept going around, but when I got to the next door, the alarm went off and the door began to close again. The mate told me over the radio that he wasn't going to do anything, so I had to do it again. I was able to open the door this time, but as soon as it was fully open, it started to close again. I turned around and saw that the other door was closing too. That's when I knew I was going to get stuck in the laundry room. The light started to flash, and static noise filled the radio. I felt like I was going to pass out. That was a bad idea because the door could have crushed me if I jumped through it. I quickly left that area. In theory, it could have been a chance that the systems were down, or someone could have been playing a joke on me. The bridge can open and close the doors, but pranksters wouldn't do that because the doors could be risky. Also, no one would have known I was there when the door started to close. They checked the sealed doors carefully the next day and found no issues. It's important to note that each watertight door has its own system, so if one fails, the others generally don't either. In other words, it's not likely that two doors would break at the same time. The next night I did my normal late-night rounds and went back to the bridge when I was done. The second mate looked very pale and was shaking when I got there. He had a cup of tea in his hand that was moving around since his hand was shaking so much. He was so weak that he could barely answer when I asked if he was okay. He finally told me that he had been watching the radar screen for 5 minutes before he heard me come back to the bridge. I didn't answer when he asked if everything was okay. He turned around to look at me, but what he saw instead was an old man looking at him from right next to him. The man was pale and had wide eyes. In an instant, the old man was gone, right in front of his eyes. In spite of being a tough guy, the second mate was crying as he told me this. I was a second officer on a heavy lifting ship at the time, which was about a year ago. During the night shifts, it was my job to keep an eye on things and make sure they were going well. On our way across the Atlantic Ocean, it was a dark and quiet night. The only sound was the waves. The scariest thing that ever happened to me at sea happened on one of these normal night shifts. I walked around the bridge station to loosen up and pass the time while I was on watch. From midnight to 4 a.m., I was the second officer. As I walked past the windows on the bridge, I saw someone walking on the starboard side from the back of the ship to the front. It wasn't strange to see someone there in and of itself, but the fact that it was 1:30 a.m. made it feel strange. At that time, the ship was normally quiet, and most of the crew was on break. Since the crew could go outside whenever they pleased, I didn't think much of it at first. After going around the window a full lap, I saw the person standing still between cargo hold number 1 and the windbreaker. He was looking forward and had his back to me. I stopped to see what he was doing. He looked right at me when he turned around. His hand started to wave, but he didn't move at all. He just stood there. This made me feel uncomfortable, and I started to notice some odd things. He was dressed in a white overall, which isn't what our crew normally does. Everyone at our company wears red overalls with silver bright strips on the shoulders, so seeing him in white didn't seem right. Besides that, he wore an orange helmet. Even though we have a few orange helmets, most people wear white ones, so it didn't make sense for him to be wearing one. Also, he shouldn't have been able to see me from the front because all the lights on the bridge were off to avoid glare, and the deck lights were on, which would make reflections when looking from below. This made me feel even more confused as this person stood there waving at me. I went to the arm of the bridge, got my radio, and tried to call him. I asked him if he needed anything, but he didn't answer. I tried again, but it didn't work. I just waved my hand at him, and he kept his head following me as I went around the bridge. He was on the starboard side when I first saw him. The radio was on the Protertan, Player Kandi. Portiuskarberstunder, Gausar Ganandi. Close to the chart table. When I called him again, all I got was silence. With shaky hands, I went over to the light controls and turned on the bridge lamps. The bright lights lit up the whole deck and made everything easy to see. When I looked up from the game, he was gone. I thought that he might be hiding in the paint store's stairs or the passageway to the forward station, close to the jacket. I waited with the lights on in case I saw him. I turned off the lights after about 30 minutes, but I stayed awake and kept an eye out for him. I never saw him again, though. Once I got off watch, I asked everyone if anyone had been on deck during my shift. Everyone said they were asleep, which made sense. People don't even have white overalls. Our whole outfit is red. There was no reason for anyone to be on the deck at 1:30 in the morning. At that time, there aren't any planned safety rounds and there isn't normally an extra lookout awake. There was talk that it might be a joke, but no one knew anyone who would plan or carry out such an act. They told me they didn't know, even when I asked them to be honest. I thought that they were telling the truth because they had no reason to lie. If it was a joke, I wouldn't have been mad. They really could have pulled off a great joke, and I would have laughed with them. However, no one ever admitted it, even after months had passed. I also looked in the area where I saw the person, but there were no signs of anyone hidden. Every night, the stairs to the paint store and the door to the bosun shop were locked. The next morning, I checked, and they were still locked. In the 5 years I worked at sea, this was the only strange thing that happened to me. I still can't explain what I saw. Since I saw him for at least 5 minutes, I don't think it was a dream. It looked like he walked forward and then stopped, having a direct look at me. When I turned on the floodlights, he was gone. I even turned away a few times to get the radio or walk to the dashboard. It felt so real the whole time. I remember getting a chill down my spine and my heart beating fast. I knew something wasn't right.